and good evening to everyone in Europe and the UK and further afield. So, as Jim said, my name is Stuart Trevivick. I join you here today to talk about organizational success through accessibility. Now, I'm going to talk about all the challenges or the successes we had from embedding accessibility, and also a little bit of other stuff as well around me, who I am, where I came from, and a little bit of family history. But first off, I just wanted to thank DQ for sending me this fantastic t-shirt. So I'm standing up and showing digital equality is my jam t-shirt. Fantastic t-shirt. I really appreciate it. It really brings home what we're trying to get across here about digital excellence and digital accessibility. So let's get started. So on this slide, I've got a picture of some mechanical steam-driven machinery and a brief family history. So I'm going to start off and taking you all the way back to the 1800s to talk about this Cornish legend who was my great-great-grandfather called Richard Trevivick. So on the right, there is a drawing or illustration of Richard Trevivick, for those that can't see it. So Richard, as I said, was my great-great-grandfather, and he invented the first steam locomotive in 1803 in Cornwall in the UK. Richard wasn't really an academic person, unlike a lot of these great speakers we've had over the last couple of days. He was actually scarcely literate. His schoolmaster described him as being obstinate, disobedient, and slow. However, he displayed an extraordinary talent in engineering, and his intuitive ability to solve problems even perplexed the fantastic engineers of their day. And because of this, he landed a job at just 19 years old with no education. And he went on to build the first, as I said, the world's first high pressure steam engine and the first working locomotive. Richard's innovations made the world of transport accessible to the masses and played a big part in the Industrial Revolution, or the first Industrial Revolution in the UK. So that's my great-great-grandfather. What about me? So I'm not a legend. I am a designer and a design leader, and I've not invented any engineering cornerstones or helped start any industrial revolutions, unfortunately. But what we do have in common is in the early years, I wasn't very academic. My best subjects at school were art and athletics. So sports day was my jam. Like that's the time I got awards and the only time I got awards at school. My school teachers described me as, I said I didn't imply myself, didn't really listen, was shy. And that was very true. I was a very shy individual. My grandfather and father were both engineers, and they wanted me to carry on and do that as well. So my grandfather was in the RAF, was an aeronautical engineer. My father was an electrical engineer, and they wanted me to go, do a proper subject. I went on and did fine art, much to the dismay of my family. However, I had a talent for digital design and engineering in terms of code. And I learned to code properly and do things properly from day one, how to validate markup, build things so they're accessible to everyone. And that really was my savior because I didn't really have any hope in other industries. I also had this intuitive ability to connect with people because I started with a grounding in design and in coding. I was able to converse with creatives, converse with engineers, and that turned into me building not only award-winning creative teams, but nurturing talent, young talent who are now in design leaderships in their own right across different industries globally. So how do we both compare? Let's wind back and look at between my great-grandfather and me. So what do we have in common? So he started the Industrial Revolution, or was part of it, and designed life-changing engineering. I designed and built web services for the fourth or digital revolution, or the fourth industrial revolution. So there was four of them, if you don't know. So we kind of had the first one, which kind of driven by coal, second one, which was driven by gas, third one, which was electrical, nuclear, and then the fourth one we talk about is the digital revolution. Again, like we compare, he was not academic, I'm not academic, so we get those things aligned across the family. He had an extraordinary talent for engineering. I had some talent for done engineering, and I could talk to people, so that kind of helped moved me along. And additionally, he was a champion Cornish wrestler as well. So he was into wrestling. He's quite a big chap. And although I wasn't a wrestler, I've studied and taught martial arts for the last 25 years. Had a little hiatus when I had my daughter 5 years ago and just started taking her. But yeah, I was a keen martial artist. I was an instructor and a keen pugilist as well. So I did like a little bit of competition fighting as well in my youth. But what really, brings us all together, what common threads? So we both had a passion for innovation. Richard Trevivick not only developed, the first high pressure steam engine, which would again was used in Cornwall. So in Cornwall, they did a lot of mining and tin mines, and they used those steam engines in there and into locomotives as well. He also went on to develop early forms of refrigeration. So some quite key milestones there for him to move forward. We're both into self-development as well. Not only have I enjoyed studying design and user experience in my previous roles, and more recently in accessibility has been a focus, but I've helped develop myself and through martial arts. So that's been a really cornerstone for me. I said earlier on that I was a very shy child, not very confident, but that really helped me. And I can't impress that enough on people. Not everyone feels like they can get out and do something like this, talk in front of people. And I would have never have done that in my youth. But through martial arts and through teaching other people, I built my own self-confidence. The next thing is around failure, right? So a little story here about Richard. So the first time they got a high pressure steam locomotive, so ideally, well, pretty much a car, right? It was something on wheels that went along the road. The first time they managed to do that, they did it, great celebration. They piled out of it, went into the pub, had a few too many drinks, forgot about the boiler, so steam engine, the boiler, and firing, and it exploded and died it. So failed. Lesson learned there. Don't move forward. And I have through the years failed so many different times trying things out. So in the early days, I started around 1999 in web design and development. Um, Browsers weren't compliant or standards based. It was very hard to build websites, web applications. You had to deal with things like Internet Explorer on a Mac. Early versions of Netscape were not easy to play around with. And you had to, I remember going to launch a rather large FMCG job site, and the day or the evening before realizing none of it worked in multiple browsers, and I had a very busy evening trying to piece it all together. And lastly, we're both shaped by movement. So Richard with his steam engines and emotion, and with his wrestling. And myself, in my early days, I did a lot of animation when I first started working, and a lot of Flash for those older joiners today, and also motion design, and also into the martial arts as well. So those kind of things tied us together from my great grandfather through to now. There's these common threads that run through us, and we never know where those things might lead you. So for Richard, led him from the UK. So he left and sailed to South America. He went to Peru and Costa Rica in 1861. So he dreamt of unlimited wealth in all the unmined minerals and what he could do to help support that. He had many adventures. Excuse me, I'm just going to have a drink of water. And he returned to England in 1827, penniless, unfortunately. And in his absence, many other people had moved the technology forward, notably George Stephenson, who everyone thinks invented the steam engine, but he did put some carriages on it and did do some early runs there. But they had all profited off his early inventions, and he actually, unfortunately, died in poverty and was buried in an unmarked grave in the UK. But for me, it led me into working for these multiple brands. So over the years, I've worked for all these brands on the right. So those you can't see: Bank of Ireland, Royal Sun Alliance, Microsoft, Tesco, Orange, John Lewis, the UK government, to name a few. And working across all these industries, I've learned lots of different things, mainly around how to improve the user experience for people. One of my very first roles, I was working for the UK government, for the Department of Education, building key stage learning. And the government were early adopters of standards and accessibility because they were a public service and they had to be. So I had to ensure that when we were building lovely animations for these services, we had plain text versions, all the code was semantic, all the markup was correct and was accessible as well. So right back to my early career, it led me to start on the path of accessibility. And I think there's a lot to be said for if you learn things properly at the beginning, you always do them that way. I'm very grateful to a person in my first job that really hammered that home to me to build things properly, build from scratch, learn code. And I know nowadays we're in a very different place where everyone uses different frameworks to bring it forward, but I think we always have to come back to that. Right. So that's a little bit of my background, where my grandfather was, where he came from, a little bit of history, and now on to the talk. So, turning an oil tanker in the storm. You may ask, what is this about? I looked through the other titles of people's talks. Everyone mentioned accessibility, how to do this, how to do that. So I thought I'd do something a bit different. Or another way you could put it is lessons learned from embedding accessibility across a global organization. And the last 8 years I worked for Fidelity International. So disclaimer here, I left at the end of the year. So after 8 fantastic years there, I learned so much. But today I wanted to talk to you about the challenges I had and lessons learned from trying to embed accessibility. And from the other talks I've heard today, I've heard many sort of similar stories and challenges people have had of trying to do this. But this is my one, and I hope you enjoy it. And we're going to carry on the nautical theme now through the rest of the talk. So we're not going to start with the storm. We're going to start from the beginning, where it's actually quite calm. So the image on the left is of the calm seas. There's a little sailboat on the horizon. We've got calm waters and plain sailing. And so this analogy is from when I started. So started in Fidelity in 2016. And we're going to, first year, get started bedding things up. When I joined to work on a single platform. We were building a new investor platform for our personal investors. And when I started, we had all these excellent people working on stuff, but they're not necessarily talking to each other. So my first thing was to do an audit, understand, see that we had many, many different styles across all our platforms. I think about 20 different buttons at the time. So the first thing we did was an audit, bring it all together and look at how can we standardize stuff? How can we reduce the cognitive load for our clients? How can we just make it easier for us to maintain these sites? Obviously, the more styles you have, the more to maintain and the more costly it can be. So we spent a lot of time on that, bringing it all together and building out a design system. And during that period, the design system matured. So we started off with like a project and we had some styles people could use into a fully automated system which had components, styles, and pages and patterns that you could use to build websites in. Also, during that time, we went from a single UK team and a UK remit to bringing all of our teams together across Fidelity into one global team. And this enabled better adoption and clearer focus, on how we're going to support the business. Luckily, I found accessibility was a foundational element of that design system. I remember the first version we did, and I made all the colors super accessible. So for things like charting and data visualization, we went from having all these very subtle, slight variations of blue to very strong contrasting colors. And it was a big battle to get people on board with that. Why are these colors so strong? Can't we just have lots of different variations of blue or whatever kinds of one? And, it took a lot to explain, but, part of the role was to go in and get people to understand why we're taking certain routes and the benefits that will bring. Other things we did, we formed enablement groups, not just me, but the wider business. So Fidelity really did spend a lot of time on understanding diversity inclusion for our employees and our clients, and we formed a load of different groups. So I worked on digital accessibility. We had diversity inclusion groups, LGBT plus, and we put together three-year roadmaps of how we're going to benchmark and then improve where we were and move things forward. And we also formed with one of my team members our Accessibility Champions Network. So we reached out to people that were interested in accessibility. And we brought them together, we helped educate them and helped to drive understanding across the business. So 2017 to 2020, quite calm sailing, pre-storm, calm waters, but things started to change. So still pre-storm, but there were ripples on the horizon, and the image on the right is the waves starting to build and the swell starting to build in the sea. So problems started to appear. No, so while everyone agreed accessibility was important, they thought it was someone else's problem to fix. That might sound familiar to a lot of you. Plus, we had 70 plus websites and applications to manage. So this is all legacy stuff. A lot of them had issues, or we presume they had issues, so we didn't have a benchmark. We had multiple stakeholders across multiple regions, different languages. So, Fidelity International. So just to be clear here, work for Fidelity International, not Fidelity Investments. Fidelity Investments is the US. Fidelity International is the rest of the world. So all across Europe, Asia, and the UK and Dublin. So lots and lots of different areas to cover. Everyone, different people managing delivery pipelines, regional regulations to look at. So, a lot of complexity to manage. And I was an accessibility advocate or team of one. So why I ran a design systems team and previous guises with a creative director across applications. Accessibility was a new thing at this point for the business, not for me, but for the business. And we had to build up the understanding and get the remit to do it. So we needed to start benchmarking. We needed to understand the size of the problem, and that's where DQ came in. So we brought in Axe Monitor. We started to see the size of the problem, which was a bit of a shock, I have to say. And we ran a number of proof of concepts with stakeholders using the tool, showing the benefit and the size of the problem. And actually, at the end of the day, how actually easy it is to fix it once you start doing things properly. And one of the other issues was, sometimes organizations just aren't set up for success. I worked into a team that was horizontal. We're a global team. We went across all different parts of the business, but we're quite small. We had all these different verticals across the business we had to try and influence, all with their own agenda, all their own change management process. So that wasn't easy, as you can see. So focusing back on this oil tanker. So, this analogy, I think, just fits really well with this, because a large corporate is like an oil tanker, and trying to make it move in any direction, change culture, is trying to turn it in a storm. So large corporates are complex matrices, which we have to learn to navigate. And part of the job, and if you work in a creative position like I did, or creative leadership, is you have to learn how to navigate them. You need to bring alliances, and you need to understand the challenges they have, empathize with them, and look to see that how you can align and how you can help them so they are supporters of you. So it's not what you know, it's who you know that gets things done. Now, I don't necessarily agree this is how it should be, but in reality, I've worked in a number of corporates. That's how it is. We also have legacy platforms. So I worked with a number of different frameworks, different platforms. Some of them were really complicated to change. Some of them quite impossible to change. So trying to get that on the change agenda is extremely difficult. And also moving people's thinking forward as well. So sometimes there's legacy thinking. We know our customers, we know what to do. And, that's not always the case. We've got to come back and really understand the problem. And in some cases, there was a lack of standards as well. So I'm trying to introduce all these design standards and coding standards, but we have a lot of teams in many locations. We offshored a lot in China and India, and trying to get that in place when there's huge demands on them. And there was definitely no blame on the teams. They're just trying to get their change done and out the door. And I'm kind of along trying to enforce new standards, and that can be really difficult to pick up. We also worked with a lot of third parties. So then convincing them they want to take longer to do the right thing can be difficult to do. And a lot of teams are siloed. As I said, I was a horizontal, but there's lots of verticals, all these different activity going on, not only for our clients, but our employees. And we had the ambition really to make all of our services and products accessible for all of our employees. So all of our internal applications, as well as all our client stuff. So it was a quite a big feat to try and pull off. And then, so that's the oil tanker, the big company. And then the storm, oh my God, this couldn't hit at a worse time. So we had a global economic crash. The economy was shrinking, which means there's less to invest by clients and customers. The cost of doing business was rising. And then we had regulation. Now, I don't actually see that as part of the storm. It's more like a big sunlight shaft shining through, but because the regulation was driving the right change. So we had consumer duty in the UK. So this was regulation put in place by our governing body, the FCA. And then in Europe, we had the European Accessibility Act, and all of them supported better outcomes for clients, but again, in a challenging environment. So budgets reduced, and projects were slowed or stopped. So we're battling all this economic pressure. We're battling this shrinking budgets, and a lot of that was coming from we reducing fees. So we had to reduce our fees, and asset management business, fund management make money from fees. So we're using our fees, we have to find other revenue. So you say all the stuff I'm trying to do is about organizational excellence. But we needed investment in that. And when everything else is shrinking and your cost of business is going up and your fees are reducing, it's almost like a perfect storm to not be able to get anything done. And also there's a lack of appetite sometimes to do the right thing and focus on just the core things we had to deliver and just keep the lights on. So how do you go about in this climate of doing stuff? So I went back and focused on my kind of goals and values. So my goals were to enable the business to do the right thing. So bring tools in, benchmark, so know the size of the problem, then look at approaches to remediate, and then any ongoing development or new development, ensure we didn't bring more problems to the party, right? No one wants to increase the size of the problem. As well as enable, we needed to fix. So we had over 500K of issues across 70 websites. There's a lot of issues, quite a scary amount to fix. I also need, as part of the enablement, to roll out the tools. So to 400 plus engineers and QAs. Bear in mind, I was a one-man show at this point, and also provide training for them. And that's where DQ came in, right? A lot of help, support of embedding that in. And at the same time as doing this as a side project, I need to sustainably grow our design system and provide out-of-the-box accessibility. So people could just use it for new projects without having to worry about it. So that's the goals, but I think for really work, you need to combine it with values. So for me, the core values here is integrity, do the right things for our outcomes. That's always been for me, like really stand by what I do and what I deliver. I want to make sure I do the best job as possible and we do it in the right vein as well. I needed to build trust. So all these people I needed to work with and deliver good results to them. So they then trusted me to do what I would like them to do and deliver for our customers. I'm also very keen on being inclusive. Why design things tight? Just design it right in the first place, and everyone has better outcomes. And also work in a supportive, collaborative way. I want shared decisioning. I want shared successes and failures, and that's really key. And it's really important to align these goals and values together. And I was trying to think how best to convey this, and I found this quote, which I'm going to read out, which I think perfectly sums it up. So, happiness is not about reaching your goals. It's about aligning your goals with your values. Progress without purpose is empty. Achievement with impact is fleeting. Success is most rewarding when it serves the people and principles that matter to you. And for me, this just perfectly summed up how I felt about work and life, and useful when the seas are rough and the swells are high and you have to focus the mind. So thank you to Adam M. Grant there, organizer, psychologist, that really summed that up. Now, let's go back to the issues and back to the storm. So there's an image on here of a wave crashing. It's very grey. And this was the environment that was building around me. So, and where we had to turn this oil tanker. So the storm. So the seas are building, the hull is creaking on this ship. To the right, there's an image of a rough and misty sea. So although we got a contract in place with the queue, it took a long time. Like these things don't happen quick in large organizations. It took about a year, I think. So procurement process can be slow. We have to do lots of security checks. We're a regulated industry. Had to run a number of proof of concepts in all our different environments to see if it worked. And, that can be it's time consuming and also slows down the progress and the benefits we can deliver for our customers. Change budgets, as I said, were slashed. We probably had too much change happening and it was probably unfocused. So a bit of refocus was a good thing. Everything now came down to regulatory and client-led projects only, which is not a bad thing, right? If you think about it, we're doing lots of change. If budgets are tight, we're focused on what we meet in regulatory and what I talked about earlier. So we had Consumer Duty and European Accessibility Act. That was great. And then also our clients were coming to us. So in that business, we had a number of large clients, companies like Microsoft, like BMW, which we provided their pensions for, and their workplace investing. They were coming to us and asking why, are our applications accessible? If not, why not? So that was, I think, some good pressure that we're seeing from in the industry, clients coming in asking for the right thing. And some of the other kind of challenges were user testing. So why it was valued, it was often shelved when budgets were tight and would do the minimal, or sometimes went to market on, hunches. We're, excuse me, a lot of experienced people, and sometimes we were stakeholder led, although we had great user experience people, we're stakeholder led. So therefore we had to learn in live, and that can be challenging when things don't work, and journeys don't stand up. And sometimes accessibility wasn't seen as a priority because, why do we want to do this extra acceptance criteria? So really that lack of understanding about what it is and, who was responsible for it. And the knock-on effect for all of this was design system progress was slow and not really what it to be. We had ambition to have a fully automated system, or even a headless system where you could update design or code and everything would update. And we were in a quite a manual space, but that required a lot of investment to get where you wanted to do. And that's not always an option. So you have to think around how do we get to where we want to be, and be in a better place for our clients. And sometimes that isn't easy and you're a lone person. So, the next slide shows a lighthouse with the waves hitting it. And sometimes I felt like the lighthouse. Although I was trying to shine this beam of hope out about accessibility and standards and the benefits that I bring and support my team and my colleagues around it, I was constantly getting hit by waves. And although we had this strong foundation because we built things standards based and accessibility from the ground up, we had constant pressure from each sides. People wanted to evolve the design system or come up with new standards. We were trying to maintain it. We're also trying to improve the accessibility all the time as well. But we had bugs to deal with, and we had testing and we had maintenance and new features. And it was a team of 15 people of design and engineers and product managers. And sometimes, it was just difficult. And I felt like I was losing trust because I wanted to deliver everything for everyone, but sometimes that just didn't happen. And that can be a lonely place to be. But you regroup, you move forward, and you look about how we can make things happen. And there was a light about to shine down to really support this. And we hit the eye of the storm. And on the right, there's a picture of the light coming and cutting through the clouds. And we found a regulatory break in the clouds, if you like. So that regulatory break was Consumer Duty. So as I said, the UK regulation body, the FCA, brought in this fantastic standard. But although it wasn't explicit, it was all about treating customers fairly and the same, so no one's discriminated. But they missed a little bit of a trick. They weren't explicit on the standard to me. Whereas the European Accessibility Act was much more explicit, and they said every member state needs to meet a accessibility standard, of which most people picked the YCAD AA by June the 28th, 2025. So I think that got better behaviours out of it. And this other benefit was, as I said, the client pressure. We've got these great clients asking us to do good things and be accessible. And because of that, we got this interest from across the business. Suddenly, I had all these people wanting to talk to me about accessibility, come and talk to my team. How do we do accessible content? How do we do accessible marketing? If you understand what we can do about it. And that was fantastic. I spent a couple of years really trying to push this and really benefits. And although we had the foundation in the design system, it wasn't really getting the traction. But these things really started to drive it forward and give us the benefit. So the light started to shine, but still, there's some swell. So we started off focusing on the high value, high traffic journeys in the UK. So the idea was to build confidence in our teams, knock off some easy issues. So there was a lot of issues around color and role name value. And the idea was to go in and build confidence in the teams, focus on quite a high number of issues that people could knock off quickly. And that really started to work. So we had, 500,000 issues. It started to reduce that down to about three quarters quite quickly, just by some focus. And this is just on the kind of UK part of the business. But there's still a little bit of rough seas, and the image on the left shows the rough seas and a little bit of light and cloud. But those rough seas were tool utilization. So we paid for and brought all these fantastic tools in from DQ, so Axe Monitor, Professional, and Axe DevTools Pro, sorry. But they wasn't really been using, and that was frustration. And that was daily down to a lack of knowledge. It was seen as a digital issue. People didn't really understand that everyone needed to work towards it. So there's no point fixing a load of issues and someone updates content on the CMS or the content management system that isn't accessible, right? So there's still work to do. And there's a lack of governance. So, we're fixing things and then stuff would go live and more issues would be introduced. So that again was challenging, but still problems to solve. So we worked through that, and then we're coming up towards, I guess, towards the end and up to the end of last year. So on to the end of December 2023. And, the image on the right shows someone standing on a rock looking to the sunset, and they've landed on the shore. So we docked the ship and we stepped ashore. So I'm happy and really glad to say that we're in a much better place than we were when I started in 2016. So in 2016, we had no user-centered design practice. We had little user testing, some pockets of good work, but not aligned, no design system. Great content, by the way, really useful content, but it wasn't particularly well organized. It was hard for customers to use. When I finished up this year, so we had a full UCD process. We had a dedicated research team of valued. We have a large digital team. Our design system was up to the third version and said was really progressing on. And the use of that in terms of our reference website, we built everything into a big reference website so people could self-serve. The usage of that was up 40% year on year. So people are starting to understand design standards, accessibility, and how to move forward. And all that content was really useful. Additionally, we stood up regional teams to support accessibility. So as I was leaving the business, more and more resource was being stood up to support and realize we needed it where we were building and developing our websites, and more resource in India and China. We've just started to roll out role-based training. So I looked at doing qualifications for a number of people, but actually role-based training, which DQ offered, was really great. So through DQ University, the role-based stuff really focused on what you needed in your role, whether it was in marketing, whether you're content production, in engineering, in design, what you needed to know to create accessible experience. And those sort of courses, which are bite-sized, you can drop in, link into your learning management system, are really great to help build that knowledge, and also drop back in and check when things get updated. And also, we're growing the digital design team and the design system team. So we're focusing more in our low-cost locations, but building it out so we can support the business better. So earlier on, I talked about how difficult it was to support the ambition we want to do. So more investment in that was good. And something that I did earlier in my career was run design thinking sessions. So when we were developing new products, I worked with my colleague who was the head of UX at the time doing that. That developed into a whole design thinking academy. So training users to run design thinking problem user-focused sessions across the business. So there are hundreds of people, I think, now that have gone through that academy, so we can actually start developing our products in the right way as well. And just before I left as well, I worked on the accessibility operating model. So also with Matthew Lukin from DQ, big shout out to Matthew. Hope you listened to his talk. If not, go back and listen to it. He's a fantastic expert on accessibility, but work with him on the operating model really helped me shape it and left that in a good place. And then I guess into this year as well, producing the fidelity policy framework as well, and to ensure we've got the right reference point for not only for our in their employees, but also when working in third parties. And some additional icing on the cake were we were recognised as a Stonewall top global employer. So in terms of our inclusion, and we were part of and a member of the Valuable 500. So this is about ending disability exclusion in the workplace. And we're also working on a British standard in accessible workplaces. So not only digital, lots of work was going on there. So while that was good, I feel like if we could have done that earlier, we would have been in a better place and move it forward. But I think a lesson learned there and one to share is, it takes time to build this and that kind of investment in the business. So if you're in my kind of position working in design, hopefully some of this has been useful and you can use that to help drive your own programs forward. And finally, what next for me? So I'm on shore leave now. So I'm on my gardening leave. I'm very much enjoying my time off. I've had time out to reflect on some fantastic experiences of Fidelity. So I traveled. I worked a lot in China, across Asia, in India. I lived out in India for 6 months as well, which was a fantastic opportunity. And I think travel is a great way to experience other cultures and understanding across the globe, and also expands your experience as well and your knowledge. I'm furthering my knowledge at the moment in accessibility and design systems and leadership, and I'm just about to finish like a good 3 months off and to start exploring new opportunities. So shout out if anyone's got any great roles coming up in design, user experience, or accessibility leadership, please reach out to me. My LinkedIn details on there. And just one thing I wanted to hold out as well. I'm a big believer, as I said, about mentoring and supporting young designers. So if any of you out there would benefit from that, I'm willing to take on applications. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Fidelity, I was mentoring a number of people from user researchers to designers to user experience designers and people starting out accessibility. And I think, taking the knowledge I've learned over the last 23 years and giving back is a really important part of working in creative industries. So looking at my timer, I'm just coming up to about 38 minutes. And so I'm going to pause there, hand back to Jim for any questions and say thank you for all for listening.
Awesome. Thank you, Stuart. Appreciate it. I'm just kind of taking a peek at the Q&A. I'm not seeing questions in there, though I am scanning through the chat. There was a lot of comments within here and just looking for specific questions. Would you be willing to touch again on how do you know the size of the problem? Could you just cover that again real quick for the audience?
Yeah, sure. So for our websites, we used Axe Monitor. So to benchmark the sites for all our live sites, we went in and set up scans for all of it. So we'd regularly do monthly scans. We get the size across all of our public-facing sites. Then we're using the Axe API within our pre-prod and prod environments to scan those. So when you have to kind of bypass one-time passwords and some security aspects, it's not so easy. So we have to kind of do that in a pre-prod environment. So we're working with our engineering teams on that to look at the size of the price. And then we're looking through what those issues are, looking at where we've got high numbers of those issues and where can we deliver the most value. So part of this is also delivering values for our clients, but also for our teams. Suddenly when you see huge volumes of issues, that can be quite daunting, especially if you're new to accessibility. So we're looking at where can they start knocking some things down first. So, to reiterate there, just Axe Monitor and Axe Dev Tools to kind of look at the size. And obviously with those tools, you can also scan PDFs as well. So some sites have a lot of PDFs, so going through those. and then working with our marketing teams, working with people in content design, uh, and our comms teams as well to brief them on how they can do better, more accessible comms for our business as well. So there's a little bit of kind of a little bit of scanning our sites, a bit of education to size it out, and then sort of limiting from introducing new problems as well.
Great, great. Thank you for that. Do you have any tips on building training opportunities and resources, especially as a one-person show?
Oh yeah, I've got plenty of those. So, and if someone wants to reach out one to one, I'm happy to do that as well. Um, so there's a really fantastic book called I think it's by a user research team of one. I think it's Rosenfeld Media. So it's a really good place to start. But just think about what you can influence. So, maybe if you're an accessibility person of one, so think about how you can bring benefit to the business. So if you understand your client base, or you can work with your analytics teams to see, for a start, if you can sniff out people that are using assistive technology, if you can then work with your customer complaints team or customer liaison teams, find out if you get any quotes through, you can start seeing where the problems are. And also for the analytics team, you can start seeing where people are dropping off journeys. And if you start digging into that, you might find out, well, hang on, I've got someone here using a screen reader and they keep dropping out, or we've got phone calls coming through. You can start building that problem. So a lot of the times, businesses might I'd call the ostrich approach. Their head is in the sand. Oh, no, can't hear anything, can't see problems. So if you can start understanding those problems and take them to your management team, um, and then you can relate that to, and I'm not going to go into the numbers today because lots of people talked about them, but I think it's like 1.8 billion worldwide people with disabilities. You can focus in your country and your product area, start showing the size of that. That will help start getting you some support. But for me, if you want to start doing it by yourself, you can use the free version of Axe DevTools. So give them a shout out to DQ for that. Start running scans, seeing what the problems are, and building up the size of the problem. So, you know, when you want to ask for things, it's easy if you can demonstrate what the problem is, how that's affecting you, and the missed revenue you're getting. So there's lots of stats around, amount of people with disabilities, and depending on region the amount of revenue you're missing out on by not doing that. And also, if you've got a fully accessible service and someone with a disability is using that and they think it's great, they're probably going to pass it on to people with disabilities or people in similar groups as well to help support that. Does that answer your question?
Great. Thank you, Stuart. Appreciate it. I got a couple more questions that have showed up here.
Sure.
How might you secure your process or ops to survive turnover? If your CPO, who said we should be leaders of building inclusive products, leaves, for example, what
Hmm.
suggestions do you have for the passionate handful of designers and researchers to keep it going as a priority?
Yeah, that can be really difficult when you lose your main stakeholder. And I've seen that before in a business. So I guess come together as a group. So, something we did or trying to build momentum was to build advocates. So you might have your main advocates left, but you're still a group of people that the business has employed as experts in your trade. So if you can, again, demonstrate the problems that are out there with your particular products, look for other sponsors in the business. So in large corporates, generally you have to get a executive sponsor to do that. So who might you influence in the business to get that buy-in? Look at the people that are responsible for customer experience, people for customer service. If you can show real clear issues that your customers are experiencing, and you can tie that into executive sponsorship, can move forward. And also that person, if they're leaving, find out if they can support as well. But yeah, it can be tricky. It depends on the organization, but generally, I find the businesses just do want to do the right thing and they not understand about it. But if you can find out if there aren't any barriers stopping you from doing it, and maybe you become that person that the advocate, that might be your stepping stone. So being a designer or something in UX, if you stand out and you put your hand forward, that's how I went. I looked for opportunities in the business. So when I started, well, a couple of companies really, like No Design System, going back 10 years ago. Okay, that's an opportunity. And is the why does the business want to do that? Well, it's going to save them money. I think, we looked at about saving about Fidelity about 1.5 million a year each year from bringing in a design system. And that's a very conservative. And you can look at, so if we deliver X amount of projects, 25% saving on each by using we can use components. And then also tag on the accessibility stuff as well. Well, we've got a number of customers that can't access our products because of this. So just look at different approaches and avenues you can do to build up that success. And I think for me, like accessibility is really starting to get the voice it deserves. I was at a conference early this year in London, run by AbilityNet, another charity, and the buzz around it now and the products that are coming in, opening up for people with disabilities, it really feels like it's like for me, it goes back to the early 2000s when there was a lot of excitement around building websites and apps. Accessibility feels like they're in that place at the moment. So use that to drive it forward. Use all this material that's come from the last few days as well.
Great, thank you. Could you talk a bit more about how you approached the 500K issue backlog? How much of that was multiple instances in templates? How much did standardizing design elements help? Tips on prioritizing remediation efforts.
Sure. So yeah, there was templates. A lot of things were repeated. So, fix one thing, 10,000 pages on a site, fix an unlabeled social media icon in the footer. Boom, a lot of fixes. Now, I found initially a lot of our engineers were kind of resistant against doing it and I found out it was really because they had a lack of understanding. So working with them or partnering with DQ to help do the training was really useful and picking off the things that are easy fixes. So, like color. Now, if you've got a design system and it doesn't meet it, aligning it with the design system. Things like role name value, again, we had a lot of those to pick off. So we started going for the kind of easy fixes first to build momentum, to build confidence in our engineering teams, and then celebrating that success. Like, well, squad one or Scrum two has delivered all of that sweetheart and celebrating it. So posting on our internal channels like Yammer. And we started to see that as I was leaving, like, and people really getting into that. So that's one approach to prioritize it. Obviously, having a design system that's accessible is great, which we had, but that wasn't always embedded in these legacy platforms. So you have to look at levels of adherence. So you might not be able to move wholesale to this accessible design system. So how can you bring in things that help, aligning to logos, to colors, the basic stuff. So, look at strategies to do that. So the closer you can have a standard to follow, and then the quicker you can get teams to do these sort of fixes that show benefits straight away, the more buy-in you get for the business and the more happy the engineering teams are.
Okay, next one. How can we get involved in user experience design for people that want to learn more and or want to move into that sector?
Well, I guess I believe everyone has 3 or 4 careers in them, right? So you can easily move, doesn't matter where you started. And I think with a user experience design and visual design, there's a good crossover. Visual design, very much being creative. I think you can learn it, but if you haven't got creativity in you, it can be difficult. With user experience design or user experience, it's all about designing for the user. So there's lots of things people can get into. It's user research, right? Clear methodologies you can use to get in there. There's loads of great resources like LinkedIn Learning, have a look at that. Go onto YouTube, user experience 101 and look at all the different disciplines you can do within that, but it all does come down to user-based research for me. Like if you're user experience designing, you're not doing user research, you're probably not working in it. But then there's other elements, wireframing, interaction design, all kinds of tree testing. There's so many elements of it. Look through what user experience makes up and look at something you think, oh, I'd like to try that. Find a bite-sized course online. If you work in a business where there's user experience designers already, go and talk to them. people love to share what they're doing. And I think the whole industry really is sort of caring and sharing industry. Normally, this is my first talk on accessibility. Normally, I'm doing talks on design and user experience. So, people are willing to share. And then if you're really unsure, go on some forums, talk to people, YouTube. I think there's so many great resources out there. I wish I had them when I started because it's pretty much you wait for a book to come out and you read the book and oh, I'm going to do that. So yeah, just reach out to people around you, look for online resources, and feel, look at where you've got a synergy. There's a huge gap in the market. We need much more resource than we have. I think, the market at the moment is quite challenging in terms of jobs. We're seeing a lot of layoffs, but that will recover. And we're also seeing, through consultancies that they're starting to book work for clients in sort of mid in Q2 or later in the year. So that industry's picking up. And there'll always be that demand, I think. So seek out someone that can help you, and I'm sure they'll be willing to help.
Thanks, Stuart. I know we're at time, but I hate to leave any questions unanswered. I do have one final question here in the
Oh,
queue, if you'd be willing to answer.
of
Did
course.
you work with legal team to implement and enforce following guidelines, or was there an accessibility team that oversaw and enforced the guidelines? I have
No.
no power, so difficult to get leaders to listen at all.
Yeah, so I think I can totally sympathize with that. So even though I was employed to build a design system out, still getting everyone to follow it would be different, and accessibility was baked into that. I think working with your risk and legal teams is great, because, excuse me, it is a risk for the business, right? Depending on where you live, even in the US, right, it's definitely a litigation risk. In Europe and UK now with new regulation there is. So talk to your legal teams, talk to risk teams. That's when I wasn't getting traction, I took that approach. So I went to people that were responsible for regulatory change. I talked to our risk teams and the legal teams, and they're really supportive. And I think and once you get that kind of flow and they raise it up through the various, change options you have to do in corporate businesses, then you can get it on the agenda and people really, really realize that that's a risk and they need to negate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Stuart. Appreciate you taking time out for us today.
And me,
And
it's
I,
been fun. Sorry,
I
Jim.
think, I think, I think that's a wrap. I think
Great.
we're
Well,
2 minutes over.
it's been great to talk. Anyone, as I said, reach out if you've got any questions. My link's in the presentation. And yeah, thanks for all your questions and time today. Goodbye.
Awesome. Thank you.